Yo, have you heard of LinkedIn Learning? If you haven't, LinkedIn Learning is an American massive open online course provider. It provides video courses taught by industry experts in a variety of subjects. Now, why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because Living Corporate is in partnership with LinkedIn Learning to provide diversity, equity, and inclusion courses. Listen, if you're trying to be a better ally, you want to understand better diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, or you just want to learn how to be a better leader, you got to check out the courses on LinkedIn Learning. So check it out. You can do it one of two ways. You can click the link in the show notes, or you go to LinkedIn Learning and you search Living Corporate. Again, link in the show notes, or go to LinkedIn Learning and search Living Corporate. I'll see you over there.
Hello, hello, hello. Happy Saturday. Sana A. Khan, and this is the group chat, and we are talking about radical power, and specifically, what is disruptive and what is happening. But before we get into our topic today, that music you hear in the background is none other than my daughter Morgan. She released her fourth single October 7th. It's called Not Cool Anymore. So download, support her. When young Black women come out with music, it's really important to give that support. And, the way that algorithms and things work is all about liking, sharing, and downloading music. So, once again, that song is Not Cool Anymore. Hey, Cynthia. Hello, everyone. So we are good to go. What I wanted to do today, Sana, was I wanted to kick it off just talking about some of the technology news happening, because I think this week was probably one of the most how would I say it? Interesting, intense, and I think even unexpected in some ways, tech news this week, right? And like always, Facebook is in the news, but Facebook was specifically in the news about two things this week that I wanted to catch up with real quick. First, I wanted to talk about the whistleblower. So when we think about whistleblowing and we think about, people who get that courage to speak up and to talk about stuff, when you're talking about a behemoth like Facebook, it's going to ruffle some feathers. So, my good friend, you've been in the tech industry for a long time. Tell me what you think about what happened. Maybe give the audience, a little bit of background, but, give me your thoughts about the Facebook whistleblower and everything she's talking about.
So firstly, thank you so much, Wanda. I'm really loving these chats, and I'm getting to the rhythm of it. So I love that. A lot happened this week. And I think what's interesting about it is a few different things are coalescing at the same time, right? So it's not the first time we've had a whistleblower come forward, right? Or for that voice to be muffled somewhat. We all know that there's practices, not just on LinkedIn, but multiple platforms of what we call shadow banning, which, and it has been reported, in fact, to Instagram or in Twitter for sure. And it's somewhere in between the range of, well, we have these algorithms that are meant to weed out hate speech and that are meant to weed out, this is their positioning, right? Or this is their position, that they have to have algorithms that can weed out some of the things that have happened during the Arab Spring. Or, for example, if you might have heard recently, because Facebook's one element of it, there's something even bigger there, which is like in Myanmar, it was found out that there were military personnel that had created multiple many sham accounts to spread hate and even report fabricated rape cases by, for example, a Muslim man against a Burmese or Myanmar woman, right? And there has been a massive backlash towards the Rohingya people, especially Rohingya women, right? So as women of color, we can relate to the idea that the buck sort of, when every other group gets to dodge the bullet a little bit on these things, one group gets stuck more, right? So there's a couple of different topics here, right? One is in terms of just corporate practices. And if we assumed benign intent, right, or just the intent of corporate, profit generation, enabling a service, providing jobs, helping, innovation, etc. There's that one lens. Then there's the lens of the workers who are in these companies, right? And we know it's not Facebook alone. We know in the tech industry, I in fact, wrote a letter when I left my last workplace. And it's not just that company or another company. It's big tech corporate in general. And what is so different about big tech? Well, one of the things that are different is that there's just so much money. And the world needs tech so much, or there's a perceived need, especially during times like COVID, where people are remote and they are socially distanced, or, and then now, especially with how that industry has gone, all the more so that people don't want to have to necessarily go back into those environments in person, especially Black women, right? And women of color. But specifically Black women are speaking out about this, right? And Black employees in general. And so it definitely, what that would mean on one hand is calling out these practices that happen, which is why when they're being put under pressure, they're like, we don't want to come back like this, and this is why. And so those reasons are coming out. So that amazing book or the amazing website that's been created, techworkerhandbook.org, that, Wanda, you also sent me personally, and I was reviewing it separately too. There's that one whole element, right? So it's not just about one whistleblower. It becomes when there are multiple people who are now saying the same thing or iterating similar stories, to what extent can they be kept quiet by general social, oh, don't do that because you're going to lose your friends and your colleagues and your business opportunities, because people don't want to be associated with that, right? This is a very common practice that's happened. It's actually now a global practice in terms of social, becoming an outlier, becoming a pariah, right? Well, when the fear of that is dying down more because there are so many people doing it, that means that now it enables a situation where two big things happened, actually, aside from the whistleblower. One was, there's two in terms of news data, which is that situation came out about Myanmar, right? Which indicates how negative that influence was, or how Facebook wasn't tracking those pieces. The second big news that's there, just generally, people aren't paying attention to Myanmar because that tends to happen, especially in the United States, with it having an isolationist culture historically. Is that there's been proven data now and reports on how Instagram and Facebook knew, but specifically about Instagram, that it was making young people feel bad about themselves. And so now there's a whole conversation about how to limit that kind of self-bullying happening through social media exposure, right? Through networks. So that's two big pieces of news. Then there's the whistleblower conversation, which was already happening regarding Google, regarding a few other companies, regarding now Facebook, and detailed accounts. And then there's also for Apple, like it's just there across the board, right? And then on top of that, now we have two big movements in terms of institutionally being able to counter this kind of culture of silencing. One is that some of the California laws were recently changed around this, which you might have seen Tim
2 days ago.
Posted about 2 days ago. Meanwhile, you've had Chelsea Glasson out there about, the pregnancy discrimination lawsuit that's been going on. There's been other people reporting about how their lawsuit has been going on as long as they were employed in the company, like for the same duration, right? It's literally you're in it for double the time. From that perspective. And at the same time, you also have movement happening. And so it's a really interesting time, because when often what comes up for me, and I was, I don't know if you were on this, but Liz Leba was holding a session yesterday with Future, and I think Ashanti and a few others, John as well. And it was the first of that one that I joined in terms of Black LinkedIn, right? And in a live conversation that's in the middle of the live conversation. And I realized that on one hand, we're able to talk about the things that are not working, that there's a white backlash going on, house supremacy, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's also a sense of, will all this make a difference? Or will we just go back to where we were, where because there are people, brown and black as well, who are more than, interested in going with the status quo and saying that I don't want to ruffle feathers. Will we just go back to the way that it was? Of course, it's not their responsibility. They're in a very tough situation themselves. They're traumatized and re-traumatized as well, right? And so will they go back to the way it was, or is something actually going to change and we're going to carry for that momentum? And so I think that's a very interesting point, that we can go into the details around what that specific whistleblower was talking about, but we know the story. We know what it sounds like, right? Yeah. And so it's not that we won't listen to the details, but what are we going to now do to support that? Because once you come out and you whistleblow, after the first initial, the outrage, etc., right? What happens beyond that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how do we maintain that momentum, right? Because the buzz will die down about the Haitians, about the Afghans, about my parents are going back to Pakistan next week, in fact. And they're like 68 and 67, and they've both had COVID, despite being very careful. And it's an emotional time for me to know that that's happening. And at the same time, you're going to hear another lens, and I'm going to stop here now, which is the fourth, I guess, point, which is a sense of competing, this perceived competition, that we're either going to give reparations to Black folks, what I call a reparation execution roadmap, and roadmap not meaning in the future, but roadmap for execution within the next 3 to 6 months. How do you execute that kind of giving what was taken, right? I don't call it charity or empathy or any of that stuff. Let's get hard and real about it. And at the same time, it's not an or that we're going to go help Afghanistan, or an or that we're going to do this or that, right? It becomes an and, or how we address Haitians and how there shouldn't be whips allowed at the border, because it's meant to create shock value. It doesn't actually help efficiency. It's not actually doing anything aside from traumatizing and terrorizing people, right? So there's I heard some of that coming out, and I think this will be a good intersection with the inside as the conversation, because when you have these different competing viewpoints and the fear of things rolling back or going forward, and then if not that, then that, and the competition between, well, they're going to either help this or either help that. When you're feeling that, how do you then unpack it?
Yeah. So that's a bunch, right? And so I think the first kind of piece is not just that we know that, that one company is not the only company that, has things like this going on. And I think that the first part of the conversation, maybe if we break it down a little bit, right? And we talk about, first the fact that this is a woman, right? Yeah. That was doing this. And this is not, and she's what I'll call, like, she reports to people, right? This is not like she has a whole division and she only reports, into the C-suite, right? So she took a lot of risk, personal, professional, financial, all of that. But I think the larger question, and you hinted on this one in your second piece too, is around, the accountability and what's going to come of it. I believe, and I think that if we can help people to understand options, choices, and encouraging people to continually to speak up, right? Because now not only do we have the Tech Workers Handbook, and I'm going to paste the link and everything in here for people, but the Tech Workers Handbook, right, is a guide for how to understand your legal
it's huge.
Your legal options and what is legal and what isn't legal,
and your strategy, right? They have a strategy too,
right? And to get even to in terms of addressing the recent law that got passed in California, right? So one of the things that companies do to maintain a cloak of secrecy, to maintain, this, they try to hide it under non-disclosure. And let's be extremely clear that we're not talking about sharing any type of trade secrets, any project plans, any organizational
None of our
developments, products.
Yep.
It's not about that. This is about behavior of other people that is being unchecked, underreported, unresponded to, or nothing. And so what happens and what companies count on is that, number one, employees, people, contractors don't have the information necessary to know even what any options exist. Number one. Number two, they make the internal policies and practices and things unclear, right? And vague, so that if you do have an incident, I've had numbers and numbers and numbers of people from all different companies tell me how they've made reports and nothing ever happened, or there's a hotline for this or a hotline for that. People that tell me they have made reports to their direct boss, their boss's boss, to HR. And so I'm saying all that to say that within the walls of all of the tech companies, right, there are parameters of behavior, conduct that's allowed. And at least now, beginning in January of 2022, when a person, woman, black, brown, queer, straight, tall, short, young, old, whatever, makes a complaint of harassment and discrimination, they are not going to be, that's not going to be held over them that, if you report this, to the authorities or whatever, that it's part of this non-disparaging agreement, and we're going to keep you from, talking about illegal behavior. Because what the companies have done, and Duana and I talked about it this morning, is they've tried to cloak all of it under like protecting their intellectual property or protecting patents. And we know that this is not about that. This is about companies who on the outside say one thing, right? Who talk about this is our values, or this is this and this is that. But then behind the walls, those people who don't who don't have the privilege of being in an inclusive or safe environment always have to suffer. And so I think that the large piece to the whistleblowing just at the high level is reporting illegal behavior, reporting unethical and immoral behavior. And that's part of what she did, but there's so much more to that. And even with that, and finding out all of the things that happen with that, in the midst of that, Facebook can't even keep our data safe, right? Because this week the breach was 1.6 billion user data.
Well, that's the other side of it, right? The whole tech data privacy security side of it. That sorry, continue, but I'll get to my point.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, right? So they know that. But the thing is, what are people going to do about it? And what people can do inside of companies right now is you can, share your story, and you should report it internally. But we had this conversation last week, right? And some of the folks that are on with us now, we know that HR, that's not necessarily a way that is going to help you do anything. So, to kind of, circle back, right, to the inside piece, and to think about it from, that power dynamic and how that shapes how you have to navigate, right, in a situation like that. Let's talk about some of the, decisions, right, that she had to even make, and like talk about that. Exactly, Erica. HR is not going to help do anything because they work for the company and they're there to keep the company safe.
They're getting paid for that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you're in a position like the whistleblower, how do you even muster up the courage, right? The moxie to be like, you know what? I gotta tell somebody because I know that this is wrong, right? And even if it's not necessarily wrong and illegal, even if it's, discrimination and harassment, those things are wrong and illegal too. So talk about, people standing up and really getting that courage and feeling like they can speak out.
And I think, so there's one thing I want to ask you, because I always sort of divide it into, we don't have to divide it, but there's content and there's process. So in terms of process for this session, right? And I'm just going to say it live. Do we want to take a little bit of a break from the inside, outside integration conversation?
We can.
focus on this, and then next session we can do inside. We can start integrating it as well.
That's fine. We can talk about whatever.
Yeah, I figured why not, right? Like, because I think that sort of weaves in these choices that we get to make along the way. I say get to make because we can say have to make, but have to make leaves you in a very powerless situation with yourself, right? And in order to be in a place where you could feel confident and sure in your choice that you are on solid, or at least some sort of ground, you're not falling through the cracks, right? A number of us who fell through the cracks, we know what that's like. Both the fall, where you're like, oh, I'm waiting for the ground now. Can you please come through? And then when you hit the ground, you're like, oh, how do I spend this time that I'm in this crack now that not everybody else knows I'm here? And then when you're climbing out, what does that process look like, right? And as someone who's fallen through a few different cracks, I can go through that process, right? And I know, Vonda, you can relate to that. So when we talk about being in a situation, I've been in this situation a few times, and I grew up around this because my father and I were talking about this yesterday. And he was in this sort of situation a number of times in terms of choosing what to do. When you're in a situation where there's right and wrong, and you know that there's a right and wrong, however, the environment is one that is telling you to do a certain thing, how do you then get through that? And I say this because I grew up around these conversations of justice as a child, even in Pakistan. And my whole family's involved with this kind of stuff, right? In terms of what is, and from different lenses, right? Without going into my siblings' own private experience, which is for them to share, right? But in terms of my father and the conversations I had with him, what's interesting when I used to see him go through this was this fear of the repercussions. If he was to take a stand, even if it's not against someone or reporting them, sometimes you're just choosing to abstain, and there can be retaliation for abstinence, right? Because you're not willing to participate in that ring or that process, and therefore you're not actually implicating yourself, so you can't really be trusted the same way that others who have implicated themselves can be trusted. Now, this could be something really minor, or it could be something much bigger. But either way, if you choose to abstain, the biggest benefit for you will be that you're in the clear. And no matter when either people come knocking your door, or righteousness comes knocking your door, or whatever, Lady Liberty comes knocking your door, the point is that you will be in the clear always, because you chose not to participate in that process. So at minimum, there's not participating and just standing straight, right? Which in itself is hard to do. I want to make that very clear. It's very hard to do that.
So when you say not participating, so are you saying, as an example, for example, somebody, let's take it into like something that could happen to you or me, right? We could be in a meeting and be the only of among, whatever,
or one of many, and it'll still happen.
And somebody say exactly, or one of many, and somebody say something just crazy, just terrible, or whatever. If there are people there witnessing and watching it, even if they don't chime in and they don't do anything, and they're in a position of influence or power or leadership, and they don't say anything, my view of it is that they would be just as complicit, right, in it, if they don't do anything to stop.
And that's agreed. So and this is very important for the inside conversation, because there's a difference between staying silent, which is acquiescing or supporting the wrong practice, right? And that's about something happening in front of you, and then you don't say anything. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about a situation where somebody comes to you and says, can you do this wrong thing? They won't say wrong thing. Of course they won't say that. They'll say, it's the way things are done, be a team player. Oftentimes when you get to hear you're not a team player, there's two sides to that. And only you can know.
That's right.
Was I not being a team player because I was being, too confrontational, or I was bringing up the wrong topics at the wrong time, or I wasn't focusing on the work, or I was distracting everybody from what needed to be done at that moment, right? And taking my time to have that conversation. That's one kind of way. Or the other kind of way is that when someone says openly to you that you're not a team player because you didn't submit a negative review about somebody, or a constructive review, right? Or if you didn't help them do something that they want to get done, but they can't get done without you, right? Now, there's openly stuff, especially in the tech world, where they will give you training on standards and conduct, and all that stuff is good, above board, you know, not giving favoritism to certain partners in the business space, not favoring a request for proposal, like when you send out a proposal to get certain vendors to respond, not providing favor to any one vendor and having clear practices on not doing that. All that is fantastic, right? And there's certain other protections that have come in place. Like a number of the tech companies now give certain, you know, like you have your job is protected and you get the minimum 12 weeks, plus you can get an additional 8 to 10 weeks of paid leave for being when you're pregnant. The problem though becomes that how are those rules implemented in terms of if your job is secure right now, how do you know that your management isn't looking to get you out while you're gone and then lining up somebody else for that role? Because, hey, even when you come back to work, you're not going to be as focused because you have a child now, right? As an assumption.
And I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen where a person out on maternity leave, and, you know, while they were gone, there was like a plan to do a lot of reorg, you know, and strip a person of their different people that they had on their team.
Yeah.
I've seen people come back, like only be out like a short time on like a small leave, and project be taken away. And you're like, oh, I was working with such and such a person. Then it's like, they were out sick and now they off the project for 4 days, like that, you know? So yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff, right, happens all the time, and people have to make choices about it.
And in the case where you have to make a choice, because I reviewed the Tech Worker Handbook and it gives you the really important thing. So like as a takeaway, because I know we have like half an hour left, right? And this is such a fantastic topic. But like, and I think we could actually even do a follow-up to after we cover the first 4 elements of how to create with purpose and power and stuff. I think we could also go into covering specific sections of that handbook with examples on how to judge whether you're in the situation or not, right? Because it's very useful. It gives you the terms like, okay, what's an NDA? What's a, you know, I don't know if it talks about a severance agreement or not, or separation agreement, when or when not to sign one. If you do sign one, how to not kill yourself with guilt because you signed one, because you're silencing yourself, right? That they say it openly in the document, and whatever version of the document you get, because I've seen multiple versions of the document across different companies. And you can choose based on, and it's always going to be based on your own situation as a person. Because at the end of the day, you need to do what is best for you and your family. And the reason why you're in that situation is because you got targeted somehow. And the reason why I say that is because if you're in a situation where you're either, if it's not like a larger reorg or a massive layoff, or a team, a specific business unit, or a product line comes to an end, or a service line comes to an end, there's usually a good, like, you know, strong companies with a lot of oversight, there'll be a standard package that they give to you depending on your level in the company. That's a whole other issue, that you might be down leveled, so you wouldn't get access to the bigger packages, but that's another topic to address, right? And I always advise everybody to be able to have, just like you have a doctor, a cardiologist, a therapist, a coach, also have an attorney. You know, it's very good practice to have an attorney to review your just anything, you know, like you get an agreement that you need to sign, send over to your attorney. Everything good with this? Okay, cool. I'm joining a new job. This is what they're telling me. This is the kind of contract it is. It is at will or not. What are they, you know, saying that you'll get locked into? What you won't, right? Assuming everything's going to be hunky-dory, it's fine. But also not when things get stuck, especially if you're Black or brown, right? Or if you're woman. And if you're both, then good luck. But that's the point, right? That you have to have, it's not live in fear, because that's the main differentiator there. How do you not live in fear? You live in opportunity and joy and hope, and prepare for the best, and hope for the best, but also know the saying is hope for the best, prepare for the worst. But you're not always living the worst, but you have the main checks for yourself. so that you kind of protect yourself a little bit. That's common practice. Corporations do it all the time, where they will not enter any sort of agreement without protecting themselves. So it's very important that you hold yourself like a corporation too. Go ahead. Yeah.
And people need to, it's kind of like, what I've been telling my daughter, right, about her music career. I told her, you are the CEO of Morgan. And so I think every person needs to look at themselves, right, as an entity and know, and Farzine would agree with this, right, that out in this market, right, we're considered, we're the product. The labor is the product.
You are.
And so if you are, and you understand that, right, you have to have that mindset, then you have to determine for yourself, you get to choose and you get to determine what types of relationships you're going to be in, career and personal, right? And in every way. And so when you're in a large organization, a small organization, a startup, whatever it might be, right? You need to have that agency, take that agency and run with it. So in a case of, being asked specifically to do something that is, either against a policy, or even if it just doesn't feel right and you're not sure whether it's a policy, then at that point, right, you are at a critical juncture and you have to determine, but it is about looking inside and being able to look at yourself in the mirror. So when you were saying, talking about people having these different, a board of advisors or advisory board or personal
they have
coaches, like I have them.
Having your own army, having your own board of directors.
Yeah. And so when I think about people in my I just call it my board of advisors, right? Because it's the people that I go to for advice about different things. And it's a broad spectrum of people with, coaches and mentors and sponsors. Like it's a broad one. And I'm specifically thinking about, somebody who was talking to me specifically about, that when you use your own voice and you say to yourself, there's some points in time where you have to really look at what could really be the potential consequences. So if you are speaking up about something that you've been asked to do that is wrong, there is a level of internalized trauma that you're putting on yourself because you're creating, right, that friction internally when you know the difference between right and wrong. It'll be just like right now, let's say I went to, because I'm going on a trip next week and I usually try to get a little bit of cash because whatever, right? If I went to an ATM,
where are you going?
I'm going to San Francisco to see my daughter.
Travel is so awesome.
But it's really super close to where I am. It's like literally an hour flight. But when I think about what that looks like, right? And think about I just lost my train of thought.
You were talking about the consequences, the potential consequences, and the friction within that ends up being created from the internalized trauma.
Right. So people feel that, and that it gets acted out in some kind of way. Right. Yeah. So either maybe we'll have a stomach ache, maybe we'll get a migraine, maybe we'll feel tired, our jaws will clench, our shoulders start getting up. Something is going to go on because you can't live in conflict. And we talked about this even in many of our other conversations, right? Yeah. You can't live in that much conflict and turmoil internally when stuff is going on. So if you're in an environment, whether
you'll keep
exactly, and eventually it'll spill over to something, right? Yeah. So if you eventually have a headache or a migraine, or you're sick on your stomach, or or you have other problems, we forget how stress and all of that in all of our bodies is one, cohesive system that works together. Right. And so I don't believe that we can operate in environments that are in conflict with who we are for long periods of time without consequences.
Exactly. And there's the side of consequences that the Tech Worker Handbook talks about in terms of, what could happen and what paths you could take, right? It's really meant to hint to you what are the different things that are going to come your way. So for example, in many companies, you won't know that there's such a thing as like, what is the status you are given when they tell you you're not performing well enough? Because they're not going to tell you, hey, we don't like you because you're black, or because you got lots of hair on your head, or because you talk so vivaciously and we have to compensate by being 10 different things and you get away with just talking vivaciously, let alone having all the skills. But like,
because that's how it is. Because that is how it is. You are speaking truth, so it's nothing wrong with it.
No, and exactly. And to your point, in fact, it takes us women time. We're like, well, what's wrong with us? Why would you not like us? And the thing is, what we're not seeing is that people are injured and traumatized, and so they don't always like something that's beautiful or that has that much power, right? And so how do you come into power with yourself? That's the inside conversation. Connected to that, though, is like what you just said, that you can be in these situations and you can stay in them. And there are ways to, there's like a way to literally, like what I help people do is also see for themselves, and even customers now, I help them do this. If you stay in this period, you will incur this much cost in terms of your system breaking down or this happening. Is it worth it to you for 2 years to do this kind of job and to build your career in this way, and then risk potentially, somebody putting you on some sort of performance plan or whatever because they're trying to force you out, and you're going to go through the stress of that. And either some people say, oh, as soon as they put me on a plan, I'm just going to leave. And I'm like, when you get to that point, you might say, oh, but do they really want me in a plan? Or do they really want me to improve, or do they want me to leave?
That's the games. But that's the games.
Will get you stuck, right? The thing is that game will get you stuck because there is potential. It's not that all performance plans are bad, right? There's a reason why, you can be helped in a corporate environment when you're put on in a situation where you have to improve your performance. But my point is, if it's a good management process, then it wouldn't go that far.
Exactly, because you would have been getting communicated again with every
over
week,
video chat,
over every week, right? Because that's how communication should work, right? And so that's the sign of a poor manager. Is the sign of a poor management within an organization.
You don't know who's above that person, who's forcing this through. You got no idea who they could have been told by some other team or something. Hey, this person has a limited number of days. Find a way to help us manage them out, right? So oftentimes in corporate environments, it's not like made this whole emotional thing or this revenge thing or anything. It can be, but it's usually cloaked under this idea of, hey, we have a lot of high performers, especially these days, especially in tech corporate. Why? Because in big tech corporate, you have a lot of money, a lot of market demand, a lot of competition. And even during times of COVID and pandemic, those share prices have risen and the demand has risen. And so they can, on one hand, demand a high level of talent, but they can also choose how much they want to pay you. Mm-hmm. And so in the case where they've already hired a bunch of people at a place maybe when they weren't as strong to attract talent, 3-4 years later, they could be like, oh, we don't have to pay this person that much, right? So most of this boils down to money. And if someone other than you, who's also already had privilege and wants to play these games, is partaking in that process, they will be able to protect themselves and potentially the people that they manage. Maybe another manager might not be able to do so, but they will be left holding the bag in communicating it to you. So the point then becomes, what I've seen a number of my white male colleagues do, is they just pick up and leave when that process starts. Because sometimes they can come out of nowhere. And you can sit there and debate with them, but what could I improve? And I'm not saying it's not a growth process. It's an incredible growth process if you are able to fully focus not on the stories and the drama and the unbelonging, which is going to be there, but if you can focus purely on the things that you want to improve about yourself, you will, by definition, become way more capable in terms of skills than even your peers. Because you're being put under so much pressure, and it's not going to be enough.
Yeah, and that's but I think that's the point, right? So before you pick up another point, let's get into
continue. That. I was just going to say that on that point, yes, that will happen, but there's also this element of how long do you want to keep putting yourself in that situation? Because it's a very high stress situation. So oftentimes people leave the job and then get another job, and they know they're going to have to get another job after 3 years. So they keep doing this process if they're not able to sustain in one role and one company and keep getting promoted, you know?
But and I agree with that. And the thing is, I think the other thing that's key is from the very outset, right? It kind of goes back to, so I've been having, and you know, maybe some people have seen posts about like the Interracial Sisterhood Coalition and things that we're doing, right? So we're having these conversations, right? And this week specifically, you know, we had a reading, Audre Lorde, and we were specifically talking about, you know, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so when we're talking about, you know, trying to climb a ladder within an organization that already has its hierarchy, it already has its rules, it already has its structures, the system is set, they know who they letting up, they know how many spots they got, they know how many black and brown dots they are willing to move a white dot out of the way to slide up. They know that, right?
Yep.
And so what
kind of white dot is very important in that. Right.
But what we have to do, I think, from the very onset is don't ever believe that just because we are extremely talented, extremely skillful, extremely prepared, top in our class at the best schools, cautious, respectful, mannerly, not too much of anything.
I call it being deferent, actually.
Right.
It's
right.
called being deferent. Yep.
Right. And so we could do all of that. And the thing that I want us to help people understand, and something I really want people to understand, is even if you do all of the things, the right steps and the right this, none of that is a guarantee that you're ever going to get what you are owed or what is deserved or what you've earned based on your contributions, your education, none of it. I know people who work for large organizations in different revenue generating arms, right? Not even in IT or legal or a cost center.
And we can explain that to people. Yeah, because there's a big difference.
Right. Yeah. But I've seen people in revenue generating positions that are making and bringing in millions.
Yep.
And they still get the same treatment, the same whatever. And colleagues, right? Male colleagues around them will get promoted and get bonuses and this and that. And that same person, woman, is outperforming other people. The male colleagues will get sent to, you know, present on a patent or something at a conference and The woman is the one that did all the work, you know, did 80% of the work, doesn't get to go. Right. So I think it's also key to know that that we are enough. And if you got hired by this company, you are definitely able to do the job, and they know you can do the job. But
they know that you're already well past it.
They know, and they know that. But what happens to you while you in there trying to navigate up and through and get your projects approved and get stuff done, that's a whole nother ball game.
Right. And I think to your point, how do you then stay focused on, it comes back to you then, right? And next time we can talk about what is that internal you that goes on, knowing that this is the entire environment, right? Knowing that you can take your chances, which we have, right? We knew I was in Pakistan. I was going to go to a Pakistani college, and I had Canadian citizenship by then. And I said, Dad, I really want to go. Mom and Dad, I want to go, right? And I remember even at the end, it was like, well, Sana, why don't you just go to university here? And I was like, no, I'm going. And now when I think about it, I was 19 years old, and I was saying, let me go 2 continents south to live alone and do my thing and get to my height, right? Which is what I was asking my parents to do. That's hard for any parent to be okay with, knowing the environment that exists around us. But given that we take those chances, knowing the things that can happen, there's no harm in taking your chances, and I would encourage it, even whether it's corporate or anything else. But one, know what you're foregoing. Like, so if you have a dream and you're going to corporate for, you're telling yourself certain reasons. I want to build my skill set. I want to earn income. I want to support my family. And the one reason that most women don't talk about, which is I want to prove that I can be docile, deferent, dutiful, and damn good at what I do.
Why would people want to prove that? So talk about that. But we only have a few minutes left. But talk about that part. What do you mean? Why would anybody want to prove that they're docile and deferent?
The same piece about being enough or not enough. Okay. And what it comes down to is that, like, we had this conversation, I think, in our first session, which was, at what age, what is that time that we realize that we're not enough or that we want to shine our light a little less? And so that sets up a practice where, whether it's in marriage or relationship or work, or just the way we show up to the world, we want to prove that we are both powerful and also will follow instructions and abide by their requirements. And then somehow we'll be enough. Now, that's something we don't always want to admit to ourselves because it sounds really different, but it is what it is.
But and so so now that you explained it like that, it makes sense, because we do have to do that, right? So kind of like in the call earlier, so Dewana was on, right, and she has a lot of big natural hair, and we were talking about, showing up, right? And somebody was on the chat like, I love the froze, right? And people love your hair and my hair, like, so, like, but to think about being in a space where you feel like you can't be, right? The harm in that, and then you add the other stuff onto it. So, like, I think
that is already there,
right? Because I think I had mentioned, even if it wasn't with you, with somebody, when I first got into the tech business, right? I was wearing a button-down shirt and khaki pants, right? Not because I wanted to wear that, because it's literally boring. It looks like a uniform. It doesn't have no flavor to it. I wore it because that's what everybody else was wearing,
right? And you want to fit in, and what happens
because you already don't fit in,
because you already feel like you don't fit in,
but you don't fit in because the master's tools were never designed for us to fit in. So,
right.
Even I was talking to a friend earlier today, and we were just even talking about the Constitution, right? And Karen was talking about it yesterday or Thursday.
Yeah.
The Constitution was written for men. And in the beginning, the only men that had right were men that had property. So that was even a small white men that had property. And then it was
even smaller.
And then it was white men who don't have property. And then it was black men. And then it just like, but
I think it'd be white women first, and then it'd be black men. But
well, not in
that year,
in voting and all of that stuff. No,
not in voting.
Black men got the right to vote before women did, right?
It's interesting, right? How it's like played. It's like, well, white woman, black man, white woman, black man. It's like it bounces based on the topic, which Kimberly Crenshaw then came up with intersectionality to help explain it. But to your point, what I'm going to say about this is that we have the topics of like because I know we're like edging into 10 minutes, right? So to sort of streamline where we're at is that with all of these topics, whether it's you're already in a job and you're doing well, but you're maybe not getting promoted, or you are getting promoted, but there's some guilt in you of what is going on. Mm-hmm. Or it's like you're doing well, but you're not feeling happy and something's missing, right? Or you feel like you've stagnated or are stuck, which I've talked about in one of the previous sessions, how difficult and deceiving the spot is. It's a self-deceiving thing to be stuck, because you're trying to avoid something potentially, right? Now, when it comes to these points, or you're in a situation where you've realized your truth, or more of you is coming out, and people are noticing, and now you're getting feedback. You're getting feedback that's positive, and then feedback that's like, you need to tone it down, one. Or two, they're going straight for the jugular of what I call, hey, performance plan. Or you can't be involved in these activities anymore. You need to focus on your core job. There'll be certain terms that come up. So part of that progress then, that process, because you're already playing that game, come back to the game. You're already in the game. You can't, you're already playing the game. You think that you're going to choose to play the game or not, what you're really choosing to do then is not say, I'm not going to play the game, because you're already playing it, which we all want to be part of, or we want to figure out how to gain independence from, but want to have those skills, and not just say, hey, I don't want this, but more like, I want the skills, I want the access to privilege or money, or I want my own definition of what it means to be privileged and be abundant, right? You find your own balance of what that looks like. Either way, you're going to have to go through a process of deciding choosing what parts of the game you're participating in and what parts of the game you're abstaining in. And then what are the consequences? Got to be ready for the consequences. Even if you don't have the full wherewithal, like I know for some of the consequences I went through, that I was really scared. And even just in terms of showing up like this and talking like this, for a while there, I did everything that came with conforming or being bold in a lot, but within a certain environment of where, yes, Sana, great job, right? And you have to then choose, okay, even though I'm not ready right now for what I think the consequences will be, I'm going to take this leap anyway because I think I will be ready. And I feel like I will be ready when it hits.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it takes that kind of bravery. There's no such thing as being fearless. I don't believe in that. Having fear is a human condition. It is a natural thing and opposite of love, right? The opposite of joy, the opposite of hope. Fear and doubt are normal, but you get to be brave. And whether bravery for you means you're just going to say, I'm not going to fill out that review for that person because I haven't had that negative experience with them, but good luck, right? Or it could be, well, I did bring in this opportunity. I don't know why I have to hand it over now when it's about to hit $2 million, when it was 2000 when I got it 6 months ago. You know, it could be that kind of bravery, or bravery might look like to you, yes, sure, go ahead and use whoever you want for that opportunity that I developed. I'm going to go create more here. So you get to choose what angle you want to take. And the only way to choose is not somebody else's example. It's going to be your own example. And for that, you need to be deeply, you need to start getting connected with yourself in what feels good. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's really going to indicate, okay, are you going to then in the end go for, even when you get stuck in a bad situation and you're being managed out or you're being treated badly, am I going to go to the EEOC and battle it out there? Knowing that's one of the master's tools, okay? But it's one of the tools we have right now, right? That gets us legislation that can move things in a different way, because it'll take a while before this whole consortium of Black and brown entrepreneurs is strong enough to have negotiating power with big corporate, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in the meanwhile, how do you then negotiate that space? Or you're going to accept that separation agreement because it's the best way to leave and you want that additional money right now because it'll make up for what you had. Either way, whatever your consideration is, if you've already gone through a traumatic situation, there's going to be very little that is right or wrong, or that you should feel judged by. That what are people going to say? What are my brave Lioness women friends going to say because I took that separation agreement, or that I didn't take the separation agreement? Right?
Yeah. Well, I think now though, so at least for people who work in California, I'm going to just shout out and say, if you're working in California, hold on for 3 months. You got the rest of this month. You got November. You got December. If you join a company beginning in January 2022, and they try to get you to sign, because I had to print the bill out because I said I need to understand like what this is all about, right? Yeah. So I mean, there's the good news is that the bill clarifies that the prohibition includes the provisions that restrict the disclosure of information, right, about factual information when you file a claim. So now
I love it.
Companies are saying now, some companies, right, not all of them, but a lot of these agreements and a lot of companies out here are saying, if you work here, everything that happens here is a damn secret. And if you tell about any of it, we gonna come after you. You're in breach. Yeah. Whether it's sexual harassment, sexual assault, workplace harassment, discrimination, retaliation, or harassment or discrimination based on reporting it. Yep. So this bill is saying, listen, you cannot require an employee to sign a non-disparaging agreement or another agreement that denies, right, that person the right to disclose information. So now they're trying to say if somebody is discriminated against or harassed at work, that you can't talk about it because you signed an agreement. But you're only signing an agreement saying you're not going to disclose company secrets. If you are being mistreated, your colleague is being mistreated, you saw somebody get touched talked to in a wrong way, know that their pay is wrong, know that they're being managed out because they're
know that they reported and nothing is happening.
Whatever, you have power, and those agreements and things is where, to Sana's point about getting in touch with an attorney. So my number one recommendation is that when you leave a job or start a job,
yes,
not only should you download this Tech Workers Handbook, but you need to have some person that's an attorney or somebody that works in law and employment law, have them give it a look. But now that we have this Tech Workers Handbook, right, you have another resource. And there are people building all kind of resources and tools. There are all kind of, databases and sites and apps where people are reporting information about where they work, within groups and different things like that. The thing is that silence and not talking about it is the thing that's allowed it to perpetuate, right? And so, I'm sitting here right here looking at Cindy Bright's book, The Color of Courage, right, where she shared her story. She went through a whole big public lawsuit. The company tried to sue her into bankruptcy and poverty, right? But sometimes, like you said, you have to let that bravery be the thing, right, that propels you forward for these things.
And bravery, to your point, I won't sit here and tell you, because let's face it, Vonda, I'm not sitting here in front of you after 2 years in my career. After
right.
5 years of my career.
Right. That's right.
Because
it's a difference. It's a difference.
No, my love. It's been 15, 16, 20 years.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that I just took it, and now I'm waking up. No, I was awake the whole time, and I had to make certain choices. When I had my work visa, when I didn't have a green card, when choices you have to make when you're in optical practical training, which most people who are American citizens won't even know what that is, right? You have to make certain choices for yourself. And there's a time when you will choose to speak out. And at any moment in your journey, it's okay. This is my point about it not being linear, that if you finally speak out, you've reached the point of Amanda Gorman, as I call it, right?
Right.
Because I love her.
Yes.
But I think the point is that you at any moment can get there. And if you are seeing yourself and you're struggling getting there, no need to feel shame and guilt about not that I'm struggling to get here. Why can't I get here sooner? Why can't I speak like XYZ person that bravely? Because that's another syndrome that's been happening in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
Without using a psychiatric term, the problem now is that people compare themselves to the perceived version of someone on social media. People don't know what's going on in my life or your life. And we'll be the first ones to say, you have no idea what shit we're dealing with in our personal lives or our professional lives, right? Or how good we have it. Either way, you can only know that through us telling our personal stories and stuff. But even then, you can't be in our shoes, one. And two, nobody wants somebody else's problem. You know your problem. You don't know the other person's problem. And you don't have the training or the history in dealing with them.
Right.
So this becomes a very personal choice that does not happen by comparing yourself to some other person out there. They make choices for their reasons. And you have these resources now and vet attorneys like you would vet a therapist, like you would vet a doctor, get a second opinion, use the Tech Worker Handbook and resources like Vonda or me or other people out there to say, hey, the attorney gave me this answer. Is that sufficient? Does that make sense? Could they have other relationships in the company that they don't want to endanger by going in and getting a nice settlement? Or maybe they want to handshake a little bit in a different way to maintain their own relationships. I'm being very blunt here. But the idea is that this happens in every industry.
It does.
And so it's very important to have your, not just board of directors when it comes to your professional advice and sponsorship, but also in terms of, well, what am I going to do if things are going downhill? And I'm scared to talk about it with my community because of feeling like, oh, this is a slap in the face and I just couldn't make it. No, it's probably because you were that awesome that you're in this situation. And because brown and Black women aren't allowed to survive in corporate environments if they're not already very good, right? So that's, and now I'm just going to close it there for now. I think it's fantastic what, I think her name is Frances Haugen did. I think she's been very brave. I think it was essential because she didn't just stop at the tech worker thing. She went into the political stuff around that. And I think there's certain big issues we have to deal with as a community now around children as well. And I think we have a lot of support as tech workers too now.
Yeah. Support, tools, engagement. People
Choices.
are talking about it. Choices, which we've always had. But I think, to something we've talked about before is we get conditioned, right, and socialized into believing that we don't have those choices, right? And so, this has been another great conversation. I feel like, if I had enough water and time, we could just we could do this for hours. We could do this because even this, right. And even a whistleblower, right? Like she's great, talk about more stuff that we already know, but there's so much. But this has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank Erica and Cynthia, Maureen, everybody who has joined in today, who's going to join in, everybody who's going to listen and catch the replay later. Like I said, this is all about having these conversations that are making change, right? And conversations that are disrupting what's happening in tech. So we're going to continue to have our conversations talking about power and what that means for Black and brown women in tech. And we will see you here live next Saturday. So until then, take care, everybody.